pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks for coming tonight, everybody, to this May 23rd District Communications Committee meeting. I'm J.R. Colby, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. I think we should go around the table with some introductions. We'll start with Narissa.
I'm Narissa Wallen. I'm the chair of the Triton Regional School Committee.
Alicia Greco, Newbury Board of Selectmen.
Damon Jesperson, Newbury Board of Selectmen.
Larry White, Chairman, Rowley Finance Committee.
Maureen Heffernan, School Committee. Michelle Cresta, School Business Manager for Triton.
Joe Perry, Board of Selectmen, Rowley.
Paul Lee, School Committee.
Ronald Ray Parrott, Chair of the Salisbury Board of Selectmen.
Brian Forget, Superintendent.
Mike Doyle, Selectman Town of Newbury.
Cliff Pierce, Chair of the Rowley Board of Selectmen.
Okay, and I'll let you take it from here, Narissa.
Yeah, sure. So in your packet, you have the meeting notes of April 25th, 2019. We don't need to officially approve these since we're not an official board, but if you could just look through and make sure that they seem accurate. As you'll see later in the agenda, we actually ended up pulling meeting notes from 2017 into this agenda packet. So, you know, having the best record going forward is definitely in our best interest. Any questions or comments on the April 25th meeting notes? All right. Moving on to landlord-tenant agreement update. I wasn't even sure if we needed this on here, but I wanted to leave it on here. I know when we were in Salisbury last month, so Rowley has their notes in kind of, Salisbury was sort of on hold at that point. You and Tracy took some notes to go back to town council with.
I believe we're ready to go.
Okay.
We're ready to go, but our document is back to the original document, and she seemed to feel that we did not have to have a universal document among the three communities. We could each have a document that was reflective of the buildings in each individual
The
town.
lease itself.
The lease, yeah. As long as we define, I think that the key is the definition of capital in the agreement. How we're gonna point to that, or if we put it directly in the lease document.
Okay. So I think that's interesting, and that makes sense legally.
Yep.
The question is, from the committee's perspective, would you want an agreement that's different for each town? Which I think could be problematic. I think if all of the thresholds and the way capital, like you said, the way capital is handled, and then it's a matter of kind of the subtleties for each town.
Right.
But I think we would have to have universal language, I'm making this up, in regards to how we handle, like, is the $10,000 capital threshold?
Exactly.
Which items we would be responsible for with the town. I think that would have to be consistent.
The definition among the three, yeah.
Okay.
The one item that I can think of that might be problematic is the notifications. Because like we said in the last meeting, we want Chris to not have to go back to a document and say, okay, well, if it's happening at Newbury Elementary, I need to do this, or if it's happening at Pine Grove, I need to do that. I think that would be the one concern that I would have, is we don't want Chris in a situation where things are kind of going down to be wondering, trying to go back to paperwork to figure out what to do next when he's trying to deal with the situation itself.
And I would think, this would be from the town's side, or all the towns would decide, I would think we could have language that's general enough that speaks to the notification process, that then we could work with Tracy, we could work with Debbie, we could work with Neil as far as exactly how that plays out in any given situation. But I think then the language would need to be fairly benign as far as the restrictions and timing.
And I'm happy to reach out to both of them to see if we can just come up with something that would satisfy that, and then I'll run it by you, and does that work?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my, like I said, the one thing concern that I can think of off the top of my head. Okay. Regional agreement proposed changes. So inside the packet in Annex 2, you'll have a copy of the, like I said, Thursday, February 16th, 2017 meeting notes, and the amended agreement for the Triton Regional School District with notes in it. So I'm opening this because it's been going on far longer than I've been on the board. But for the time that I've been on the board, we've been talking about updating the regional agreement. And there were some changes that were proposed fairly early on that we had discussion on. You'll find a summary in the agenda packet of the conversation that we had at that point. There are changes that are ready to go, and so there are pieces that are set, and then there are some that are still open. So I thought that, to my thinking, it's become clear to me as we've gone on that we're probably never going to be in a situation where we've checked every single box, and we're absolutely positively ready to go to the next town meeting. So I wanted to bring it back here and ask the members of the DCC their opinion on taking the changes that are ready to go and potentially setting a date to bring them to next spring's town meeting, with the idea that we could have 3 or 4 solid meetings in the fall, into the winter, depending on what the deadlines need to be to get that done, to at least get some of these changes through. If we can finalize some of those open issues, like the landlord-tenant language in the meantime, great, let's get those in there. But I feel like we almost need to have a deadline that we're working towards in order to get some of the pending changes through, and then everything else can be ongoing. If it takes another 3 years, if it takes another 5 years to kind of get to the next point where we'd have a critical mass to bring it back to town meeting again, that's one thing, but otherwise I feel like we're never kind of going to get there. I feel like we need to have a point where we say, okay, let's stop, let's work on everything that's been agreed upon up until this point and get that through a town meeting hopefully, and then let's continue to work on everything else that's open. So I'm bringing that here, asking your opinions to say, what do you think about that? And these aren't necessarily what's going to happen. This is just where we left the regional agreement discussion to move specifically into the landlord-tenant discussion and the alternative assessment discussions.
Yeah, the minutes literally reference kind of page by page and section by section what this shows. It has a little description of why we proposed the changes in the blue boxes with the red lettering, and then the notes from the meeting literally say what each town said they wanted, didn't want. So I didn't go through and mock anything up, because the last time we met, which again is now coming up on 2.5 years ago, there wasn't any formal agreement on anything. It wasn't ready to be prepared and sent off to town meeting, because we said, okay, let's create this really quick and expeditious landlord-tenant working group and alternative assessment working group. And 2.5 years later, those two are still spinning. So, as Nursa said, if we can check these boxes, knowing that the landlord-tenant are connected, right? Those are tied as we've had the discussion. Keep those ongoing, and then check the box and revise the rest of this, because some of it's just aligning practice with what we do anyway, and some of it's just kind of streamlining process, making a commitment to review it every 5 years, or every 13.
There are things in this regional agreement that are agreeable, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
But
we
you
had-
could go forward with the agreeable aspects, knowing that there are some aspects that are not agreeable, like the alternative assessment.
Yes.
But there are things that we could at least agree on to get
Exactly, and some
I's
of them,
dotted, T's crossed,
Yes.
so to speak.
some of them may need language tweaks based on, because this was just the draft that kind of came to the table at that point, so it was generally agreeable, but it may need a tweak. It will obviously need to go to town councils, so we'll need a review process if you're gonna move toward a spring town meeting date. I thought if we could bring this up now, then that leaves us, I don't know when the drop dates are for having something like that ready for town meeting, but if we can come back and work in September, October, November, and December, and have something for January, or whatever the dates happen to be, that are kind of the deadline to have something definitive to say this is what we want to go to town meeting with. I was hoping to have that conversation now and say, yes, we definitely want to do that, let's commit to getting this done in the fall and the winter, or no, we're not ready to move forward, nobody's interested in bringing this to a town meeting, kind of with the changes that are agreeable in here, let's just continue talking kind of in the direction that we've been going.
Okay.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If we decide to go with incremental steps forward, I guess for lack of a better word, moving this forward, what would the lack of information in this document do as far as binding or non-binding? Do you know what
Do you mean as far as the alternative assessment, Alicia?
No, the regional agreement. So if we decide to bring the regional agreement before town meeting, and, let's say we do have things that are agreeable, but there are things that aren't agreeable.
Yeah.
And, I guess it's a legal question. Can we pass over those parts that aren't?
Yeah.
We can't come up with a thing.
Yeah, let's say we would just ignore, right? So we don't bring up saying, oh, hey, we're talking about this and stir up controversy around things that we still haven't settled on. We just go through and agree upon the things that we believe are simple language. And again, the purpose tonight, to read it one time, isn't to go through one by one and rehash them, but to say, to have everyone take away, here's the agreement we talked about 2.5 years ago, here's the notes of what we tentatively agreed, take that back, boards of selectmen and finance committees can look through those. Are we still on the same page? And maybe it's a meeting or two and we say, yeah, let's check those boxes. There's no reference to a landlord-tenant agreement or a lease or any of that until we then.
So when we go before town meeting, on the town meeting floor, the town meeting's gonna vote on, an agreement that has missing parts. Is that true?
It's-
Not
Okay.
part of the
Okay.
consideration. These
Okay.
are the parts.
And then everything the way it is will be the way it is. It's
So
just
everything that
not-
stays, we don't have an alternative assessment now, so it wouldn't in a revised, wouldn't even talk about an alternative assessment, just stays statutory method. We don't have a landlord-tenant, we don't have leases, it would stay that way, and just, it wouldn't mention it, and so we'd be editing a document to just reflect the changes we've discussed. So it wouldn't.
Agreed upon.
Right, I'm sorry, yes, agreed upon, important, a legal background, thank you. So that's, it wouldn't, that's the only reason and only way it would work as a two-step process.
Okay.
This agreement hasn't been amended at all since 2006.
Right.
So there are things that have been common practice of business that aren't codified in here. And I mean, I guess to that end, when I went looking for other regional agreements, I mean, I found some that go back to the 1950s, literally have never been updated, and they are totally different from the way that the district functions. You can tell that based on their budget and their regional agreement. I don't think that's a situation that we want to be in. I think we want to be following the guidelines we have, because this is what's been agreed on by our towns, so.
And I think, I don't think there would be, unless everyone could come to an agreement, I wouldn't be interested in pushing landlord-tenant and the alternative assessment if that's gonna be a sticking point, because that continues to be a sticking point depending on the town, those, again, I understand those are fine. So if we say we wanna continue working on those, but can go through the majority of the rest of these edits, and there's not a million of them, I think the majority of them are pretty straightforward. There was one, and Cliff, you mentioned it when we met earlier this year, I think it was talking about basically the term used for this group. And you were suggesting something with the word advisory, right? Does it have a?
Yes, I think some changes could be made to that.
Right, so I think there's subtle changes. Section, what would be section 15, communication committee. It's on page number. So it's a communication committee, and it, has the explanation, proposes a broader inclusive membership of the communications committee and clarifies responsibility for the calling of meetings. So that's not to say, at the time, how we were functioning, that language made sense. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I remember you were talking about having an advisory.
Yes, something
role,
like that. Something to
which
that effect.
I don't think that ever came up. Cliff wasn't sitting at the table at the time, and so having different folks sitting around the table with different ideas, I could see it tweaking and getting better, But that's the hope, is to kind of have everyone take away this and say, are we committed to that at least? Making all of these substantive changes, setting aside landlord-tenant and alternative assessment, unless we really could come to a quick conclusion, and at least check these boxes.
Right. I also am a little uncomfortable with one sentence in that section. This committee is solely for the exchange of information. That seems very restrictive to me. And I don't know what was the intent behind that, but it seems like it's just, give us the information, we don't want to hear anything else.
Yes.
Don't expect us to act or do anything based on that information. I think
public meeting law stuff, and not the way it
Well, I think the spirit is exchange, two-way.
Yeah.
It can be advisory, it can't be binding, because this isn't a body, so in regards to, with the minutes, they're not minutes, because this isn't a formal committee, a formal meeting of the school committee, it's not a formal meeting of the selectmen, finance committees. So that's why it can't be, unless the towns agree that you have a formal role, then that's definitely checking in with council, because I don't know the implications there. But we can, if we agree the spirit of the meeting, we can certainly change language to reflect that.
And that's part where not having adjusted anything since 2006, things change. I mean, it needs to be a living, breathing document. It should be adjusted more frequently than every 13 years.
Yes.
So I would just want to sound into the original question, and that was whether or not we should take the piecemeal sections that we think we all agree about at this point and put them before the town committee, the town meetings. And I think it's a great idea, because otherwise, if we can't get to that point, then it almost begs the question of what's the purpose of the DCC meeting. If we can't just take it piecemeal. I mean, I'm on the Shellfish Commission in Raleigh, and we amended the bylaw or two. There's no problem, in my opinion, with going before the towns with the whole agreement that has the parts that are not agreed upon, and just submit 2, 3, 4, 5 sections that this body agrees upon and thinks will pass, and then present it to the town officials in early January. I mean, I think it's crazy not to do that, because it begs the question, what are we doing?
Some forward process.
I'm looking in that direction down the table to see who has thoughts. I know this is,
No,
it's a commitment, right?
Yeah, I think
But-
that this, and I think we have a good working group. I mean, I don't think it could be a developed work group that kind of goes through the language of what is agreed, and it'd be representatives on all 3 select boards and, the school committee, so we can not have to have it be in a large meeting, because we'd be here forever. And then present it back to this, and then go to legal counsel and go forward to town meetings if that's what we decide to do. But I would be in agreement. I think there's enough I think there's more that we agree on than we disagree on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 2 things that we disagree on, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot in this document that we all agree on, so I think that would make sense, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, the 3 towns can't come to consensus, and just leave that section out until we can.
Right.
Make some progress. We do that with our bylaws all the time.
Language doesn't dissolve, it's a binding agreement now, we don't change it, it stays as is.
So. Good. Settled. That's good.
Is that a yes?
Marissa,
I heard a lot
clarify
of
one thing
silence.
for me.
Yeah.
On section 1,
Oh, yeah. So these were just the proposals. If you look at.
right, but
Okay.
it says no changes to what's there now, or what was there originally?
No changes to what was there originally.
Okay.
So there are proposed changes where it says agree to changes. That's the new language, you'll see it crossed out and then you'll see new language put in blue.
Mm-hmm.
That's agreeing to the blue language
Okay.
and the crossed out sections. If it says no changes, that would mean that the agreement as it originally was, at that point was agreed upon to stay. And again, this is 2 years ago, basically, so I don't know if anything changes from this. This was just the last conversation that we had. Brian and I went back and we discussed this pretty much all through the late 15, 2016, and early 2017. And this is where we kind of stopped. This was the last point that we had talked about, the whole regional agreement, and then kind of split off into those working groups to try and iron out those 2 major issues that were still sitting out there.
It's my phone in the other room on the charger.
Nice.
What is it saying?
I could explain
Smart.
this.
Turn it off.
So, just a note, so in the minutes, the only things that are reflected in the minutes are sections we talked about changing. So section 1, B and E. B, we were proposing adding, in a vacancy, it was the select board, the members, the remaining members from that town, and 1 member from each town.
Right.
All 3 towns said, we don't like that. So that's where we said, that says no changes.
Oh, I remember the meeting.
Oh, I know you remember,
Because at that time, I said, no.
Yeah, so that's so each of these, where it says section 1, B and E, those are the sections that we were proposing changes. So it doesn't go through section by section, only those that we propose changes.
So do we like the working group idea? To work, I mean, I guess part of the question is, we need to find out what the deadlines are. So I know Tracy is here, I don't know if you have an idea of about when something would be done by. We can go back and ask in the other towns.
For fall town meeting or
For
for annual town?
spring, yeah, for the
Okay.
annual.
Okay, I was just thinking. we could
Fall would
ambitious
be,
things like fall meetings.
fall would be very ambitious, I think.
Okay, probably if we had something by 1st of February at the latest.
Okay. So if we aim for
But if this
January.
committee all came to agreement, you've got a lot of representation from the FinCom and selection, so they'd be aware of it all along the process, but 1st of February.
Alright. So, yeah.
So can I ask a question about working groups? So I'm wondering if we can say, let's just leave landlord tenant and alternative assessment off the table for the moment, right? So we can just say, let's focus on this, and then,
I think we have to.
yes, well said. I think if we do working groups, we make it a longer process versus this larger group, and we take it by chunks, articles, sections, or what have you. If we say, in September, we're gonna tackle, I don't know all the numbers, but sections 1, 2, and 3. If the select board, selectmen, any of the groups can get their thoughts, look at it, you can talk about past changes, come up with, new changes if they are, and then talk about those at the meeting. I just think that's gonna be quicker than trying to
Did you say you disagree?
get.
Well, speak.
I'm shy, I'm not.
No one's buying it, Freeman.
I mean, I'm speaking as Salisbury, so if you disagree,
No, I have a few concerns. One is that, as a town, we have paid town council to do a lot of exploration, more of the regional agreement than really the landlord tenant thing, because that's one of the most important things for us. And I mean this sincerely with total respect. I've sat here before and heard, Newbury say they don't wanna come to the table because they remember the time they had the short end of the stick. But after exhaustive research, I don't remember the time that they had the short end of the stick. I mean, all the dynamics are changing. We're all losing population. Newbury's losing population faster than the rest of us. But we have to collectively come together to do what's in the best interest of the school. So there's gotta be a little give and take. So I think sometimes I'm afraid we're just kicking the can down the road. That we have to deal with the big issue, the issue that concerns Salisbury the most, which is looking at the regional agreement, because we don't no longer believe that it's equitable. Our council, who I have faith in, said there are at least parts of it that conflict. I think we.
with the landlord tenant is what I'll.
Correct. I think we've got to deal with that, and if we keep trying to take it in little sections without dealing with that, then we're doing the kids and everybody a disservice. So, that's all I have to say.
So that's the, if I'm understanding that correctly, it's the section that speaks to capital assessments, and then how they're apportioned by town for the elementaries, but then also another section that says the district owns Salisbury Elementary. So those are the two conflicting.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, which is the landlord tenant issue. Yeah, so I guess then the question is, so what you're saying is, if we're not addressing that head on,
Yep.
that is what you're saying by kicking the can down the road.
Correct.
Okay.
So why can't we still address that issue? Why can't we have a group that still continue to work towards that landlord-tenant agreement and getting it to the point where it's acceptable. In
we're pretty close.
tandem,
Oh, no, but we've said that we're not going to do the landlord tenant until the other stuff.
Right, we're miles,
So
we're
we're
miles
not, yeah,
apart.
that's why we said different. But I think we can do, I disagree with Freeman, I think we can do this and not kick the can, still have it be enacted, because we're going to say no to landlord tenant. And so if we're saying that, I think it still makes that part a hot issue that we can't just push back because that won't go away. That, we're gonna make that sure that that doesn't go
so
away.
can the two still move forward in tandem?
That's what I'm saying, that's what I think they can.
That's what I think so, okay.
He said, no, my cohort said no, but.
I'd like to resolve what I think is a pressing issue.
Yeah.
And
That's fair statement.
And I wanna resolve that too, but I think that we can do both.
Just to clarify, you're saying, we'll say no to the landlord tenant unless alternative assessments on the table, just making sure that was clear.
Which we haven't, that will be on the agenda at our next selectmen's meeting, but
Okay,
that has not been voted on. That will be on the agenda.
Okay.
But
Jeff?
It's still hard for us, where we have a motion with the board that is staying with a two-step, let's say, in certain other issues in what we're all discussing tonight. And part of that dissonance comes from the fact that this is a town without water and without sewer. And if we look at our build-out issues, we don't seem to be growing exponentially anytime soon. And we've certainly got a lot of people sending their students to other places than Triton. Some of the new houses that are moving in, so it's hard for us right now, and it's gonna take a lot of workshops and a lot of effort, and it's not something that a little committee can almost just throw at town meeting, because that's unfair.
Agree, I don't think there is a
We
quick
really,
answer.
I mean, if we start to move in any direction but where we are now, we really gotta discuss, you know, where we need to go as a town with such small enrollment, and also no mammoth build-out on the horizon because of water and sewer.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the issue with you guys is, and I wanna make sure we're talking about the same issue, isn't so much an alternative assessment as it is talking about an alternative assessment. Like Newbury doesn't even wanna talk about it.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so there is no discussing like, how do we get there?
Right.
If nobody comes to the meeting, because
Right.
we've had the alternative assessment work group, so to speak, and it's been Raleigh and Salisbury for 3 years. We've had the chairs meeting, and it's 3 of us, but we don't talk about that. So I think that that's even coming to the table. And so I hear what Freeman's saying, is that he wants us to continue to talk about that, as do I. I think we can do both. I think we can continue to talk about the alternative assessment in addition to talking about the small little amendments. You know, we were just trying to find, so in my opinion, because we haven't voted, so I'll speak for myself, in my opinion, the landlord tenant is the only thing that keeps people hooked, because they want us to take the ownership of Salisbury. So that's the only thing that at least pushes people to the table. Or else, if we give you that, we have nothing to negotiate. But I think they can happen in tandem.
So I'm hearing two different things from Salisbury, I guess,
Yeah.
and I just wanna make sure that if we're gonna set up a schedule, we're all sort of bought in. I can just say, from my perspective, I do see those two issues continuing to go on. I don't see them being an immediate resolution. I don't see the rest of this agreement, the rest of the changes here though, being dependent on that being resolved. We could literally, the rest of the changes could come in 2020, and then in 2021, if you have a resolution, they come in at that point. You know, you can bring those in front of town, those come in front of town meetings, if everybody's in agreement on those two issues at that point, or if it's 2022 or whatever it is. I'm just hesitant. The reason that I brought it up tonight is because there are other things here that can go through now while that continues to work.
And I think that we can have a work group to look at this, and then it goes to individual selectmen's. So, I mean, Freeman and I are disagreeing. I mean, who knows, there's 5 of us.
Mhm.
So, you know, I mean, when the changes get made, it could literally be me saying yes and the 4 of them saying no, and then Salisbury, then we're not going to town meeting
Right.
to have this. So I think there's another check and balance, checks and I think we can start this and then have our disagreement work out in a selectmen's meeting when we go for vote.
Freeman's shy, so you won't even see.
Yeah, I
You
know.
know, Marty, I don't think we're disagreeing on anything except priorities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to have one step come first,
Mhm.
and Ronald Lee doesn't think that's quite necessary.
Yeah.
But I don't think if we accomplish the first step, we're gonna have any meaningful resolution to the second step, because I think we're gonna go around and around and around on it, so.
Not that I want to agree with Freeman, but I've been sitting here for 8 years doing this, and I fully agree with you, Freeman, that we're just kicking the can down the road.
That's why I'm hoping to bring some of it, at least.
Yeah,
in.
but that gets some of it, but
Yep.
where do you really get the rest of it?
Yeah, and
You know?
I think he's right on that. You know, if we start in increments to bring in little things, then we never attack the big thing, which we've been avoiding year after year after year. And I think it's time that we stop avoiding it. That's all I have to say, because I am shy.
But how do we, if Newbury's not willing to have that discussion,
Yeah.
there isn't a discussion to be had.
So
So does that then hold up all these other things?
So what do we do, Brian? Well, we hostage and they refuse to come to the table? It's an issue that affects all of us in the long term.
I agree.
And we have to have the long-term view. You know better than I, school enrollment is changing, school dynamics are changing. We have to change the way we have looked at it in the past. Well, we're not gonna get anywhere in this. So,
One thing we haven't discussed is what other alternatives are there to the alternative assessment? We've only talked about a 3-year rolling average and a 5-year.
Marissa's given us about 20 different options.
Correct.
In that meeting, you've been to those meetings, Larry, we have all of those different options. It's not just one or the other. I think there are,
Well, we haven't discussed any of the other options, and basically we have 2 options now. One is, the option that we're been under for the last several years, where one town gets the shaft every year. And then the other one is a 3 or 5 year rolling average, which is dead on arrival, no offense to Newbury. So,
see, I think there
we're
were other
not,
options that we just haven't
Yeah, we talked about equalized value, we
Yeah.
talked about, do you let income come and play in that at all?
well, one other option would be that each of the 3 towns have a total assessment, let's just say $1 million. Okay, so all 3 towns, the maximum assessment total for the 3 towns would be $1 million. Okay, now Triton's budget might come in at $1.5 million or something like that, but there's been so much talk about the state helping things and stuff like that, so the difference would be made up by the state. If the state doesn't come forward with money for that year, then Triton has to cut back their budget. But at least something like that, each town knows approximately what their assessment would be.
But how do we do that when we don't know what our costs will be? We had $750,000 in special ed costs, all needed and deserving costs. We didn't know that, when we started this budget process. This is happening, right underneath our feet. So that would unequivocally decimate everything but special education programming.
Right, but then when each town gets their assessments, okay, and let's just take Salisbury, their assessment of almost $1 million decimates their budget,
Understood? Yeah.
so.
But that's the difference, is that's a discussion that happens each year versus putting a threshold where it would, whatever the word is,
mechanically cap.
Well,
A figure.
but then Triton knows what their cap is. You know, $1 million increase over last year's budget. Plus whatever the state comes up with. I mean, no offense to Marissa or anybody like that, but you know, the only talk has been the state's coming through, we're making progress with the state, we're doing this, that, and the other thing. Okay, fine. Now, get the rest of the money from the state, if it's that good.
It doesn't work that way now.
That's like
Otherwise,
saying to the
That's
town,
not the way it works.
just go get an extra $1 million for Rowley from the state. And that's,
I know.
Pretty sure that's
I
not how it
know
works for
that's
the
not
towns
how it
either.
works.
I'm with that.
Okay.
speaking an awful lot for someone who's shy.
And I think that it ignores this idea that I keep coming back to, that we're trying the best that we can to run a balance here, because the more we cut, the more we lose students to choice and to charter schools, and then we don't have a choice. We literally are just assessed a fee for those students. There's no choices about what programs they're to offer. That's out of our hands.
$200,000 this year more we're paying in out-of-district choice, for school choice, because of kids as well.
And the more that can also happen on the special education side too. If we can't bring in programs, then we end up paying to send those kids out, and we don't have a choice, and that is incredibly more expensive than having those programs in districts.
Right, but I mean, if you add every program that every kid wants.
We
okay,
don't.
You bankrupt the town.
We are nowhere close. We are very careful. I'm gonna give you the example of last year's budget, where we looked at bringing a behavioral program in-house because we had students that were on the crux of going out. And it seemed like a good, we could literally save money in that year. Not talking about a 2-year savings or a 3-year savings as that program proved itself out, but in that year we could have saved money, right? And because there was no funding for that in the budget, we didn't do it.
And I have 6 students in my school to tell you that didn't happen. They have to come to see me.
And we're paying
And
more
you're
to the
paying
North Shore
$40,000
Consortium than we could have done it
per
to run
student.
the program in district, but we didn't have the capital up front to be able to set up the program. And when there's a team, an IEP team, it's the team that makes the decision. If it was my child on an IEP and needed a program, I'm not gonna agree to a program that doesn't exist yet on the promise that we're gonna build a great program. No, I'm gonna say this is what I want. And I've got no argument if it gets to my
Social
level.
worker.
Well, yeah.
So I fully
It's a good
respect
program, too.
that it's a burden on the town. As far as our roles are concerned, I think we're doing everything we can to try and find a balance between keeping those assessments as low as we can and not incurring the additional expenses that come along when we have to make a significant cut that's going to cause students to go out of the district for one reason or the other, and then we just get stuck with the bill. I don't know what to say other than that.
It's literally been 10 years of slow cuts to certain programs. And the only thing in this year's budget that we restored was late buses, right, that's it, right, Michelle? Like late buses, 2 days a week at the middle school, high school campus. That's the first restoration we've done in, I can't remember. Everything else has been trimming to accommodate increased costs. And we're still, I mean, I'm not arguing, we're still.
Trimming, but, you know, at a $1.7 million budget
Right.
increase.
Right.
Okay.
But again, still, I'm not disagreeing that we're still passing on costs to the towns that are unsustainable, and that's the ongoing discussion with the state. But it's not, we're not making decisions, we're not adding stuff in every year to inflate those costs. Or to, I shouldn't say inflate, that's a bad word, to increase those costs. We're not adding services back to increase those costs. It's the cost of doing business. We were talking about this in the Finance Subcommittee yesterday. We're rebidding transportation next year. We're probably gonna get nailed. We're our first contract of 5 years with NRT, we were the lowest rates in the state, second round, so it is 10 years now. We're eking back up. Who was it that just went up to 35%?
Burlington.
Burlington, 35%
37%.
on transportation costs.
37.
I mean, I'm on the state transportation commission, and, you know, we're reviewing all these things. There's nothing we can do when when bus companies can't get drivers, and they're talking about, we, run efficiencies through, regional transit authorities. I know a lot of buses flying through Newbury, Byfield, and Raleigh and Salisbury from the regional transit authority that we could have kids hop onto. So there's not this silver bullet, there's not these magic things that we can just say, yeah, just cut those costs. We're subject to any municipal, we're subject to bidding and procurement law that is not about always it's about fairness, it's not about the best price. And the Inspector General said that, Greg Sullivan said that in a class I took once, and I literally almost hit the floor. It's not about the best price. So we're restricted in what we can change as far as our costs. Yes, we could slash the teacher's contract, we could pay them 20% less. That will not attract the quality teachers that you want teaching your kids. These are our kids. That doesn't do well for anything. So I get it, we're incredibly, we're the biggest employer in all three of the towns combined. But it's the nature of education. I would love to change that. I genuinely would. I mean, I feel like Nurse and I are banging our heads at the state level, listening to these hearings, and people come up and make promises, and then they go back and vote, and then we send emails, and they texting us still at 10 o'clock at night when they're on the chamber's floor. It's not as simple as you make it sound, Larry.
Oh, I know it's not that simple. But it's just that there doesn't seem to be any work on alternatives or on making progress. Otherwise, all we're doing is going down the same rabbit hole that we've done in the past 5 years. And that's, 3 towns get the shaft, but one of them gets the larger one. As long as the 3 towns are satisfied with that and are willing to live with it until a certain place freezes over, then
I'll say hell. Well, I agree with you that there hasn't been a lot of progress as far as
Triton
freezes. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of progress with the alternative assessment and that discussion. But as far as progress on the budget, it's cutting people. It's literally, that is our only, with 80-85% of our budget tied up in personnel, that's the only place we have to go. We can cut transportation? No, we negotiate for transportation, for just locked in electricity and natural gas.
But we make cuts in the health insurance.
Yep, that's true, that's a good point. Yep, just renegotiated health insurance.
I think people are forgetting that this isn't gonna change. This isn't gonna go away unless something changes at the state level, and I know that's what we're all working towards, but the 3 of our towns, Newbury, Raleigh, and Salisbury, couldn't afford Triton. We couldn't override our way out of it if we could have passed an override every single year. 3 towns with a $20 million roughly budget cannot afford a $42 million a year school district. We just cannot do it and have police, fire, and roads. It's not mathematically possible. And the state has to pick up the rear because we can't. And that is the point that needs to be driven home somehow, some way. We could ask Triton, to his point, to cut everything, close the school. We still couldn't afford it.
Brian and I met with Senator Lewis, the chair of that chair of the Senate Committee on Education, prior to everyone else coming into the meeting on April 30th, and we went through all the numbers. He came in, he was incredibly well informed, brought all our numbers, was able to talk through them with us, and then said, "Tell me your story." And we told him what was going on in our towns, and he said, "We are the poster child for the other changes outside FBRC." I mean, those were his words that night.
And he's trying to learn. I mean, he has that piece I wrote on circuit breaker, and he came in with that. So they're trying to listen, but
But even if we do an alternative assessment and we agree on an alternative assessment, that is never gonna solve our problem.
Right.
No.
It's not going to.
It can make it slower, it can make it more forecastable, and can make it
even.
more,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
But I
more
think the
predictable.
biggest thing is forecastable, predictable, I mean, the fact that we then, cause it's not, you're right, Alicia, it's not solving it, it's not going away that we're still gonna have to pay the amount of money, but at least if we know in November, December, and January, a little bit more than what we do now, and having to figure out, you know, like, we got it in late February, I think, was Michelle,
Yeah.
she was, late February that we
Right.
found out what it was.
Right.
Then that's when you're going, oh my God, now what do we do? So at least if we're finding out about it in November, it's a little bit easier to figure out things, to move things around than, you know, this means we're cutting fire, we're cutting police, we're cutting DPW.
That's fine, but I just don't want anybody to think that an alternative assessment is gonna fix this, because it's not going to.
Well, the reality is, any of the solutions on the table, and again, all these things being shot down, all these amendments that are going through the Senate, because they're pushing it, saying they're gonna legislate this, they're not doing it in the budget. I still don't have hope. I have hope that there will be some additional money, but it's not gonna be a massive panacea for Triton. Even this, even grant, $268 million new dollars in chapter 70, and we're getting, what's the latest, 68?
Oh, that's up.
$67,000, yeah, it went from 20 to 30 per pupil. But in that assumption, they changed the foundation enrollment, so that takes away circuit breaker money. So we're actually net losing over what we assumed in the budget. So,
Lose it.
losing, yeah.
Losing.
So in the latest, in some of these scenarios, the Fund Our Future or the Promise Act, we're 75,000 less than we're getting now, which is 100,000 less than we were getting in 2002. So I don't have hope because there's not a clear understanding of the impact. There are some. I give Senator Lewis massive credit. Diana DeZoglio jumped into this literally head over heels
Yes.
on the Senate side.
And Senator Tar as well.
And Senator Tar, yeah, I mean,
He gave
look
up
his speech up.
speech,
He did. He
yes.
nailed it yesterday. But there's so much misunderstanding about the impact, and when people stand up there, when senators stand up there with years and decades of gravitas and talk about the fact that you can't give more money to districts with less kids. They're getting the same amount of money they were, and they have, fill in the blank, less kids. That's not the way it works. It doesn't, when a student goes out, it doesn't just drop costs off of your payroll. So,
Don't they know anything about fixed costs and how that works? And besides that, it's a revenue problem we have here, nothing to do with expenses. I mean, and until legislatures are willing to try to say that there'll be a tax increase in somebody, this kind of stuff is gonna happen all the time. It's only gonna get worse, no matter how much you're shifting, how much posturing you wanna do. It's a revenue problem with the schools. And the state should, assume some of it, because that's the state's greatest assets are the kids, the future. And so I don't really understand what the problem is, but it's clearly, in my opinion, a revenue issue.
Jeff?
Listening to what Alicia said and listening to the conversation, on top of that too, and Tracy and others, I see Bernie, maybe can correct me, but I don't know, Newbury is kind of, once again, in that not a lot of commercial real estate. I mean, I don't know if I see the towns having their budgets, and we're on the back of the homes.
Yeah.
Our tax basis. So I don't know at a certain point if we're gonna start to have a lot more taxable income at our fingertips to be able to pay for more even if we could. I mean, I don't know at a certain point if the towns, Tracy, do towns always keep getting more and more taxable income, or do we reach a static point sometimes when we have a build-out issue? Let's say, when you run out of places you can build houses to tax or commercial property, what happens then? So, it's another way to look at what everyone's saying from the school down. I mean, I don't know at what point the towns stop growing with available money.
Well, I think we're all subject to the Proposition 2.5 limits, and I think that's
Well, if you
more.
want, like you said, you wanna override your way out of it, that's another story.
But you can't, even if you wanted to, you can't.
Well,
There's not
so-
a high enough override to cover the cost
But like I
of all
said,
of it.
it's from this way and also this way.
Yeah, the only way to solve it is growth, right? I mean, it's
Well,
not,
and
you
at
can't.
what point do
And if you don't have it, right, I mean, if you
Yeah,
don't,
where do
you can't 2.5
towns
levy out
can't-
of it.
Towns don't not grow
Right.
historically forever,
Yeah.
so.
And I think that's something that we, at Salisbury, I didn't only speak of us, we had to evaluate of how to bring in more revenues. And again, I laughed about the pot shops, but we are really banking on our 2 cannabis retail and medical, and looking at cultivation. We just passed sewer, which we've been fighting for that forever, so that businesses, so we're looking at other ways. But again, it can't all go to the school. We also have declining roads. I mean, I think it was, I forget what the figure was, that if we keep on the path, with the chapter 90, with the roads, if we keep on that path, our roads are demolished. So I mean, there's always some things, you have to find ways to be able to increase more money. And I think you're right, we are able to start, Salisbury's at least able to start to look at what some form of finding new revenues, because that's been what we've been working on for a while now.
It's not gonna change until taxes go up, someone has to pay, because that's the bottom line. I mean, you even look when Dukakis was the governor, what the tax rate then and how much it's dropped since then, you know, it's dropped about 8 percentage points. I mean, where is this money coming from? Everybody wants to say, oh, we're gonna cut one, but people don't wanna pay more in taxes, but they want services, that's the problem.
I think what'll happen is that one of these Promise Acts or one of these other things that go through that give cities like Springfield and Holyoke and Worcester and Boston, I mean, millions, 50, 60, 75 $million a year more in revenue on the backs of towns like Newbury. It's not unique to this Northeast, it's, no, the Cape, it's the western part of the state. I think what will eventually happen is that these towns will, these other school districts will come together and sue. And like that's, ed reform happened in '93, it'll have to come through the judicial system, because there's no way that if what they say and what they're advocating for at the state level happens, I mean, you'll have kids out in the western part of the state on a bus, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night if they regionalize, and that's what they're gonna say. They're gonna say combine. They're gonna say combine superintendents, they're gonna start at the administrative level, and they're gonna combine. They did it in Maine, they did it in Vermont, and it doesn't work. And it ended up in the courts.
The issue is, McDuffie case resulted in Ed Form of '93, resulted in this formula.
Right.
So this formula passes the legal test. So are there discussions about lawsuits? Absolutely. But the issue, the Foundation Budget Review, FBRC, we keep talking about, you can pump $2 billion into the foundation formula. That raises foundation. That doesn't go to step 2 of the formula, which is what we're arguing, but that's what affects the towns, is that aggregate wealth. When you look at the complete wealth within a community to say what its wealth is versus a median income, or some other factor that's reflective of the entire population, not just perhaps a select few individuals that are carrying massive wealth within the town. So even if FBRC, they dump $2 billion in, that doesn't change trade.
Right.
It doesn't bring us any more money.
Right.
And all it does is float up that foundation number, which whacks away at our circuit breaker.
I think more equitable would be a medium rather than an average. If they're taking a mean, a medium was more true result of,
Yeah.
A large population rather than, taking an average, which is gonna get skewed by people who are making over $1 million or whatever, so.
Right, and even
Which
worse,
is-
just a total
They're
sum.
taking the total.
They're just
yeah.
taking the
Yeah.
sum.
Which is why, like, Salisbury's working as hard as we can to increase our revenues, and in this case, hurts us, because then our aggregate wealth goes up, and then we end up having to pay more. Even though we've gotten more revenues, we're having to pay more because our aggregate wealth is higher.
So if it was a median income, a community like Salisbury would be better reflected. You've got great wealth in property with the ocean front, but then the median income doesn't reflect that property value. When you put the aggregate in, they start to match, and then they see what Salisbury is a wealthy community. So it's just
It's a broken mess.
it's a broken mess.
Jeff?
I've never understood either, and correct me again if I don't have all my information, but I think it's New Hampshire and maybe some of the other states. And I've been, like Leslie is gonna be on our planning board soon, I have been on the planning board for 10 years. I never could get through my mind why we don't have impact fees for developers that come into your town. I mean, if I understand myself correctly, and I could be a little off, but impact fees aren't part of the Massachusetts idea, but I think New Hampshire uses strong, especially with their high property taxes, is that the developer's gonna come in and build a lot of real estate that's gonna, you've got impact fees now. in-
Especially for the marijuana.
Big time.
Well,
It-
no,
it-
impact is
it-
okay,
it-
but I'm talking residential.
All development, we have impact fees.
Good. I mean,
We have
those-
access
that's-
fees.
That's good, because that's important.
Was a conversation starter.
It was. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. That's the last word. Impact fee.
I'll be quiet, Brian.
So what happened at the legislature? Well, give us a legislative update. Am I jumping ahead in the?
Yeah, because I think we need to decide what to do for regional agreement.
Yeah.
State legislature's next.
Okay,
so
sorry.
It is, we'll get that.
um,
So I like Riley's idea of, doing this in tandem and moving the regional agreement in pieces forward to town meeting, and then have the other things spinning off on the side, and just keep them moving forward, but at least the district and the towns make progress. That's what I like.
And if Salisbury doesn't wanna do it, then it
Right,
won't happen.
then the selectmen vote against it, and then it stops it.
So, I think we try for what we got now and see where we get.
Any other opinions on that? Any dissenting? All right, well, barring anybody yelling no at me, then I'm gonna suggest that we tentatively move ahead with Tracy's timeline to say that really January is where you need a solid, foundation, a solid, revision to go to town meeting with, and kind of work our way back from there. If we go with the working group, do we wanna have them work through the fall with or maybe come back in October and then come back in December? We don't usually meet in December, but I don't know, timeline.
December, it's a terrible month.
I know, it's a terrible month, but, if you go from November to having to have something done in January, that's
What are we gonna
a
have?
pretty big jump,
Yeah.
so, I don't know.
Look, can
So
make it
what-
early December.
When would I'm sorry, I'm not processing.
Yeah. So Tracy said February 1st is, kind of the very end of where they need a final draft to bring something to town meeting. So what I'm asking is, then can we set up the timing to make sure that we're coming back to this group to do checks? If we're doing a working group, when does that working group meet and who's on it? And if we're coming back in the fall, are we doing 2 checks back with this group and then making sure that we have something ready to go in January? Do we need to come back every month? How do we want to structure that to make sure that we stay on track to meet that deadline, so that we're not, because literally if you look through this document, I believe it talks about a February or a spring 2018 town meeting date that they were aiming to go for at that point. So I'm saying if we're gonna go for a 2020 spring town meeting date, let's figure out the schedule that gets us there, rather than just saying we're gonna have a couple working groups and they're gonna go work.
So I think that, the work groups can work and then put it as an agenda item for every DCC meeting, that they at least give a report. It doesn't have to be a page by page, look at this now into the final document, but at least updates from the work group, for each DCC meeting. And so then the final decision, if we don't meet in December, if say this group votes on it in January, is that too late, Tracy? So, like this group, DCC, would kind of look at it and approve in January, and then go back to each individual attorneys and select boards and what have you.
That would have to be done before then, I'm assuming? If she's saying go back to attorneys and select boards in January, I'm thinking, from what you said, that if we're gonna have it final by then, that really needs to be happening in the fall. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah.
Sorry, Tracy,
Yeah.
you're the only one here I have to go to, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
Well, I'm assuming you guys have your town meetings
Ours are
around,
late, ours is the last one that happens out of the 3 towns,
and I
so
think
you got
Raleigh usually falls around the same time as
Yeah,
ours.
yeah, ours was just this past Monday, so
Yeah.
we are later.
So what if we came to the September meeting with everyone having reviewed this, not necessarily, what do you call it, official votes by select boards or anything, but just everyone having reviewed everything we did in the past to come through and identify, are we still, yes, everyone's still agreeing, no, we don't wanna add the one person from either town, and identify any other issues, and then just set a course from there. If we need to meet more often, we meet more often, if not. I think the first question is, are we blowing this up? You know, are there 30 things we wanna change? Or are we basically gonna go quickly through and say, yeah, 90% of what we already agreed, we all still feel the same, but there's a couple other things we'd like to chat about. And then it might be a couple meetings and.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because if we're not gonna do a portion cost or the landlord-tenant agreement, how much issues do we have? I mean, it didn't seem like.
And I think things like you were talking about, that advisory, the word advisory,
Yeah, but, you know,
that's a good discussion, but that's not 3 meetings.
No,
Yeah,
definitely not.
I like that idea.
so I think that's what we do. Everyone comes ready, prepared, having done your homework last year.
Yes, teacher.
Wow.
So they're back. And then I think we can
That's doable.
set a course from there.
Oh, yeah. It's very good.
And I think it could be, I mean, I think at this point, it's helpful to have, you know, as Freeman and Ron Lee were saying, this is Freeman and Ron Lee talking, this was not the official statement of the selectmen. This is good, it's everyone's opinion around the table, and some people's opinions may change, others won't.
So, alright,
Do you want to set the schedule for the?
I was just gonna say, do we wanna move that up and try and, it feels so far off to say September at this
So
point.
close.
Because that's our next meeting.
That's our next meeting, and that was gonna be my other question, is do we wanna try and sneak a meeting in June? I know that's a tough month, schools are out early, I know. Brian wants to actually take all his vacation this year, he has a goal, we support that goal. Trying not to send him over the edge. But,
I wanted to see if you knew.
You knew Jim was gonna say.
yeah.
Two meetings.
Yeah, there you go.
As long as we're in the source.
There you go.
Could we do it like earlier in September?
Yeah,
And
I mean,
first-
I'm open to
The
anything.
first day where everyone's back, the last week of August, as far as us getting wrapped up. All the schools are back open, everyone comes back to school the 3rd. So,
Fifth.
I would say that's always, by the time, Michelle understands, by the time we get to September, September's like calm, right? One year's closed, one's opened and waiting for others. So that, the 5th or 12th? something like that.
Do we wanna stay with the same day, the week, or does it not matter as much? We've been on Thursdays for the last, I don't know, forever.
I think we've chosen the past, Mondays and Tuesdays, alternate.
Tuesdays.
So those are,
Yeah, Monday's definitely.
so then Wednesdays generally intersect with school committee, I think that's where we landed on Thursdays.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think Thursday.
Do you wanna aim for the first Thursday? We'll hit the
Fifth.
5th.
Yeah.
Do you wanna set dates from there, or do you wanna set dates for the full year?
Oh, I would say let's set dates at least through that fall, where we'll be working.
Yeah.
So the next one would be 10/3 if we stay on that first Thursday date. And then 11/7. And then if we did have to meet in December, it would be December 5th.
That's not bad, that actually works out, because then if we need that 4th meeting, November 7th, right? December 5th.
We going somewhere?
The conference.
Oh, MASC, yeah, I
Starts
usually
that
see the dates for it, yeah.
Usually starts that first Wednesday in November.
That was bigger. Oh yeah, that's Thanksgiving.
So maybe
Same
bump that
thing.
one to the second one.
You'd
Maybe
be
I-
so weird.
No, I usually-
You know how to get out of here?
So,
I haven't seen dates for that yet, but that would, if we bump out a week, that would put us on November 14th instead of November 7th. So we can hold the 7th for now if you want, and then we should have those dates by like July, is
Right.
when we, I think, right,
That's
are,
what you can sign up.
yeah,
We can always revise it when we get September meeting.
yeah.
And you all usually send us out a calendar for January.
Yes, we usually decide in the fall though, and I didn't wanna leave that because I feel like those September and October, we just kind of make our way through because we're finding our feet again and there's no real momentum. And if this is something that we wanna, that we have a deadline for, that we're moving toward, we can't afford that this fall.
Are we gonna still take it as a traveling roadshow, or are we gonna meet someplace else?
I like the traveling roadshow, rotating chairs, but.
Right, which even, if you look at the wording in that, in the agreement, it's that it's always run by, so
Yep.
we've kind of even changed that. It says
Yeah.
that it's run by the chair of the school committee, and we have kind of already changed that.
Yeah.
We still let Marissa make the decisions, we just.
Hey, come on.
So the MASS joint conference is set
Oh.
for, there you have the dates.
It is. Okay.
Not the MASC, it is the 6, 7, 8.
Okay, so if we said that was the 14th.
So go with 14.
So we'll be looking at September 5th, October 3rd, November 14th, and December 5th. On Thursdays at 6:30.
We could do some good work in 4 meetings, and that would allow at least hopefully then something to take away that town councils could be reviewing December into January, another one in January to say, done, and then get it, and reviewing the earliest time meeting. I like it.
May not even take that much time.
No, no.
Wrap it up in 2 meetings.
You never know, right?
No need to overmeet.
Exactly. Well, there's gonna be budget discussions and everything else going on to that point too, so.
Right.
By the time we get the answer. Sorry. Pushing Brian over the edge. So to your point about rotating, if this is Newbury, then the next one would be Rowley, okay, so that would be, September's.
Or does it go back to Triton?
That's boring.
No, I know, but, I mean, where did we meet? We met Salisbury last, and then the one before that.
I think the one before that was Triton.
Was Triton, okay, so, okay.
Yeah, because I remember Valentine's Day was in Raleigh.
Because we weren't sure about whether or not we'd be freezing.
Right, that was the first time with heat.
Yes.
Yes.
Worked out well.
Yeah. So we just say, so, that would put the October one at Triton, the, November one in Salisbury, and the December one back here in Newbury. So, I can put out an update of that. And, well, actually, while I'm thinking of that, I know that there have been some board membership changes. Mike, this is his first time. So traditionally, we have sent the agenda out to everyone that could potentially attend these. If whoever is in each town could get us the updated email addresses for the appropriate boards, that would be terrific, so that we can make sure that everybody's on
Yeah,
the
we have
list.
a new number.
That's right. So if you can get Tina's email address, we'll put that on
We do
there.
not, we ran unopposed, so.
The quiet one you gotta
It was brutal.
They're stuck with Freeman and I'm for Greenwood, blessed with Freeman.
That's what
Truman never talks anyway, so it's all good.
Right.
We'll hardly know each other.
Super shy.
Yes. School committee has a new member too, so Jim Scully, who thankfully served for, was it November of last year through May, did not elect to run for the election, so Aaron Jansen actually took that seat, so. Salisbury, yeah.
Yeah, so the homework is, yes, thank you for clarifying. Homework
Yep.
is gonna be Tuesday.
Have it all there.
Yeah. So it's looking at the edits and then what we agreed in the minutes and seeing if you still agree. And then also taking a look at the things we may not have looked at editing and see if there are things that we want to talk about.
So just to clarify, we're not gonna look at anything dealing with apportionment, right? Because there seems to be a lot of issues.
I think, was there an MGL change in there, I think? I'm not sure, I think we had to put an MGL reference in there. So there's a few things in here where we just literally had to put in references to Mass General Law, or the general law that we had referenced has actually changed. So there was a new reference that was put in here. I'm not sure about that. So the chapter 70, section 6. That's right. So this is the other language in here, but yeah, I think we're still good on that section. So, I mean, we can look it over again, but I don't see.
Section 5 is basically landlord-tenant alternative assessments.
Right.
Yeah,
So
see a
we're
reference
basically
to that.
saying, we'd love to agree that, sure,
Yeah, right.
but in the meantime, let's hold 5
Okay.
as a separate discussion. Continue.
Any other questions or comments on that before we move on? All right, so state advocacy update. So I know a number of us attended the April 30th meeting with Senator Lewis in Salisbury that Senator DeZogno was nice enough to set up. So I mean, I can give you my perception on it. It was actually nice to have some, I will call them allies in that room, people who are coming from the same direction that we were coming from and knew it, because it was not just Triton standing alone. We were there, and Kentucky is in the same boat that we were in, and Amesbury actually had a school committee member show up, and they are in a very similar boat. So that took it out of the, oh, it's regional schools versus municipal schools, and Rob Chamberlain, who I've actually been corresponding with since then after having met him that day, he was very aware of the fact that they are being affected by the same enrollment issues, by the same hold harmless issues that that both Triton and Kentucky are. So that was really nice to have there. Brian and I were able to meet with Senator Lewis for about 45 minutes, I think, before the meeting officially opened. I mean, I sketched it out earlier, but I was very impressed with him because he literally came, he opened a folder and had a packet with notes in it with all of our financials in it. He had our enrollment trends in it. He had, I mean, he kind of had the, if you are gonna have a data snapshot of the district, he had the data snapshot. The piece that he didn't have was kind of how it affects us, what the story is in our district, where those numbers are coming from, and so he kind of clarified the data. And then he said to Brian and I, can you tell me the story? Can you tell us what's happening in your district? And I think he got it. I mean, he clearly has a very good grasp of everything that's happening in the Chapter 70 formula. And while he didn't make any promises, I mean, he recognizes the issues. So that was nice to see. There was a pretty good representation there. I don't know, I know Alicia was there, Maureen was there, Michelle? No, Michelle wasn't there. Brian was there, so I don't know if anybody else was there, that if you wanna,
No, I spoke to
if
him,
there's anything you wanna.
I spoke to him later on, he lives in the same town that I came from, so we have that little bit in common, so. I just reiterated to him what this will do to our town, we cannot afford this. I think that's gonna be the biggest, message, is that the state has to come up with Chapter 70 money, they have to, it's in the Constitution to have to educate every child, and they have to do it, and it just, the pie's only so big, they just gotta cut it up different, unless they do what Peter said, come up with some new money. But he seems like he's gonna go on, he's not listening to us, so where was he going next, out to the western part of the state or down the Cape?
Oh, it's not in order. So he is literally, when I've seen him on social media, he'll literally be out in Western Mass one night, and then the next night he'll be in.
Yeah, so he's
you know.
doing his homework, he's going around the whole state, he's listening, he co-chairs this committee, I don't know what he can do once he gets to meet with, they meet as a committee, but I just hope that they listen to him, because he's listening to us.
I think the changes there, again, trying to pull this out of the budget process. But the problem is, I know there's been lots of news coverage of the Mass Teachers Association and the president being, claiming that she's making this into a circus and it's drama. And literally the Mass State House News Service, the update from today, Patriots players urge action on ed funding by August. So you've got, Devin and Jason McCourty and Duran Harmon all showing up at Lynn schools and pushing, it's this hype, and people don't know the facts. So people genuinely think that when they say the Fund Our Future campaign with mass teachers and the Promise Act, they think they're gonna get more money. And so people are coming out in droves and passing resolutions by committees and boards of selectmen. And it's just not truth. And we've been working, had a debate with the vice president of the Mass Teachers Association, and their lead analyst, and he literally, I said, look, the Promise Act says they're gonna give us $500,000 over by 2026. And his little response was, I don't know where you're getting that information. And I just said, your website. So I mean, literally, the people don't know what they don't know, and people think, and to their credit, they think they're doing good things, and they think they're fighting with good information for a good cause, and there's not. So it's maddening.
So what got me a little bit upset at that meeting was when Senator DeZolio said that, she's not gonna vote for this because it harms most of her towns, but it does help Methuen, Haverhill, and some other, and possibly
North Andover.
Yeah, it does help some of her towns, so, and what she said was that the Mass Teachers Association, the School Committee Association, and the Superintendent's Association aren't singing the same song.
They're starting to understand.
That bothers me,
Yeah.
because it's gotta come from them, because it can't come from us.
Yeah, and there's definitely been moving, MASS, which is my organization, there's been movement in the last few months.
He mentioned tapping you for a resource,
Who mentioned that?
Senator Lewis.
Yeah, we're
Yeah, no,
continuing
he's-
to have that discussion.
Yeah.
I was talking to him on the
Yeah.
phone last night.
Yeah.
He said, and Senator DeZolio said.
I think it's very important if you get a seat at that table because you're the only voice of reason that I've heard so far. And I still think that we need to get to,
Good for you. She doesn't get out much.
we still need to get to the senator, and the governor, and the lieutenant governor. Because I don't like what I heard about her saying that, this is gonna help this town. It's not gonna.
She doesn't get it, she hasn't got it. Freeman and I talked to her last year, she definitely doesn't.
She doesn't get it.
Who, Polito?
A lot of people
Not
don't
a
know.
clue.
Yeah.
No,
Not a clue.
no.
She's on the enrollments down, why is Costo going up bandwagon? She said that to us, so.
Yeah,
Not
and-
a clue.
And when you have that argument with people, for any rational other discussion, it makes perfect sense.
Correct.
But
On
unless
face
you-
value, it sounds right.
Perfectly logical discussion, but unless you understand a human services organization, that's people, it just doesn't work that way. Especially with the increase in services, right? If it was just same services, different time, yes, but that's, this amount of support we're providing now versus what we provided 20 years ago it's not even on the same scale. So yeah, good people arguing for what they think is right. But, Senator Jane Diaz, the exact quote was, "We have a phenomenal and fair foundation formula, we just need more money."
No.
And I just wish I could have reached into the screen and said, what?
Well, at the MMA meeting this year in January, Mayor Walsh was up there touting the Promise Act. And
Oh, yeah.
I
They
made the
all are.
mistake of sitting in the front row and everybody was clapping, but I wasn't clapping and he was glaring at me. And like, we all can get behind this education, and I wouldn't clap because I can't get behind that.
Well, if you're not clapping, then you're against equity.
Right,
But that's not the truth.
right.
So what hopefully will happen now is that there will be, this was really truth, we talked about this, that they're hoping for legislation by August. So this isn't happening, what Senator Lewis and Desiree were saying last night is to get this, take it up in June, is what Diana texted me about 10:30 last night. It's not gonna be solved in June, but if it really becomes a discussion, then we can have a discussion about equity. Because what this prompted me, set me off yesterday was Senator Tarr, beautiful speech that you have the transcript for. You should
I was
share it
actually
with
just
people.
gonna read
It's
part of it,
just
but yeah.
beautifully done. And then
He's
it was to increase the minimum per pupil aid to $100. So from 30, so that's $70 per pupil, so that's another couple $100,000 for us. And Jason Lewis and Diana Desaglia voted against it. So I emailed them, please tell me why. And so there's this whole argument that it's gonna be legislated. It's more of a discussion so we can talk about equity, we can talk about the real problems with the formula. So I promise to believe her for now.
Yes.
So,
Oh my God.
So their point, which I, just from my philosophical point that I come at this from, is that you can't do this piecemeal. That if you continue to have some groups fighting for minimum aid, and some groups fighting to keep the foundation budget as it is, and some groups fighting to increase it, and some groups fighting for charter. So that's still gonna happen, but if it's happening siloed, that is much worse than having one solid plan to say, this is how we're gonna move forward. Let's have all that compromise happen around this table so that everybody has some wins, and that we're moving in an amenable direction for at least most, if not all, because when you do it siloed, it just doesn't work.
So is that the
to an
7 to
extent, I get it.
54 vote that I saw?
Yeah.
come through?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is part of what Senator Tarr said on the floor. He was talking about this idea of increasing minimum aid from $30 to $70. And he said, and he had already identified that there were, he's talking about, there were 182 districts that would receive no additional aid through the $286 million in foundation aid that they put in this year. And he said, the right way to do it is say, let's look at these school districts by any measure for those 200, and let's take another 10%. And I know that we have heard, and we'll likely hear it throughout this debate, about the significant increase we are spending. That's appropriate, and we acknowledge that. But what we are saying with this amendment is, let's take another 10% of that, and make sure that if you are right now planning a school budget in those over 200 districts, and you are struggling with trying to make ends meet in many cases, with a double-edged problem of having reduced enrollment and increased costs, and you say, how can that possibly be? We'll talk about that in a little while. But what we're saying to them is, we didn't forget you. We didn't leave you out. We're not satisfied to say that only $30 per pupil minimum aid is enough. So I would hope, knowing the Senate, that we would say yes. Let us make sure that, to use a nautical metaphor, this tide that we're creating lifts as many ships as possible, because every student in the Commonwealth is important. Every school district deserves to have the best chance possible at maximizing the opportunity for the strongest possible learning environment for each student. This is the modest way to do that. It makes a real impact financially, but it also sends a very strong message about fairness and equity. So, Madam President, I hope that the amendment is adopted. And he had talked for quite a while before that, because Senator Tarr also likes to talk.
And that got shut.
That was powerful, yes, and
that was 7 to 32, yeah.
yes, and that was, I got the phone call last night from Senator Zoglia, who had Senator Lewis with her, and I ended up on speakerphone with them for a while, and it was, their thing on this was, from the beginning of putting this budget together, there would be no policy change in the budget, that the policy changes are going to happen in the filed bills. They're not gonna happen in the budget itself. So while they appreciate what Senator Tarr does, and they said it was very important to have that discussion, that time for that discussion is when the bills come to the floor in June in the budget.
So are they gonna be all on the same page at some point?
I don't know. That remains to be seen, right? You can try and predict that.
The hope is that they're either motivated because it's the right thing to do, or because they've got to in order to get it passed.
Mm-hmm.
That there's got to be a win for everyone in the Chapter 70 formula, right? Regional, still transportation, we still fight that battle. Circuit breaker, we still fight that battle. But the win within the formula, there has to be something for everyone. That's what I keep hearing now from people.
And I think the other piece of this, which I didn't read the part of his speech that it's in, but he talks about, because people raised, when they were kind of responding to his speech, they raised, well, we need to continue to abide by the court case. And he said, well, aren't you afraid of having a new court case on your hands that you then need to go and abide by, because you're not now being equitable to these other districts? And I think that's a piece too that'll come into play. That was the first time I had heard that said publicly. Yeah. To have somebody say, look, you're gonna end up with another lawsuit on your hands. Yes. It's not just gonna be foundation aid
right,
anymore.
That's what if they don't get their head around it and get it fixed, it's gonna come through the judicial system. It has to, because it's not fair, and it's not equitable.
Mm-hmm. It's just much harder for us to sue them than it is for Worcester, because Worcester can say, oh, I'll set aside $100,000 a year.
Yeah,
no problem.
That's not gonna happen until we really start feeling
but
pain.
it won't be just Triton, it'll be the 200 school districts that aren't getting anything, that will pull their money together. It would have to be.
So anyway, so there was good news other than the minimum aid. This afternoon they voted 82% regional transportation in the Senate budget, which they'll have to guard when it goes to conference committee, because that is a higher number than the House number was. But that, in that we're going to be seeing a decrease through circuit breaker, that can hopefully at least help bring us back up closer to where we had estimated in the budget originally, so that we're not having a budget issue this year, once the revenues come in, those final revenues.
It's not as qualified.
It's
The
not
good
much.
news is it gets us back to zero.
Yeah. If that, I'm not even sure, it's gonna be.
Good news is relative.
Yeah, good news is relative, right, yeah. So that came in today, so we're gonna be doing the absolute best we can to try and guard that as an advocacy group and make sure that that makes it through conference committee. And then the last piece was, I know that Rowley and Triton received it. I'm assuming that Salisbury and Newbury as well received a response from the letter that was sent with the legislative letter about the bills.
From the Senate,
Yes.
from the Senate?
Yes, from the Senate, yes. So Senator Carr said, let's all get together and talk about this, let's sit down. I had asked him to come here tonight. The Senate budget debate is still going on, and he can't, of course, leave the State House. So that wasn't an option. But he would still like to have a conversation with kind of everyone that would traditionally come to this meeting. It needs to happen relatively early in June. They don't know when those bills are gonna come to the floor, but it needs to happen before that happens. So I spoke with his scheduler today. She is currently checking dates on his schedule, but she thinks that it would have June 3rd and possibly June 4th free as potential dates to come out to somewhere in the area wherever we decide to hold it and have a discussion. And when I talked to Brian about it today after following up, he also suggested that we invite all of the senators, and if we can get as many as possible in a room, great. Let's.
All the senators, just actually.
Sorry, all the
Yeah, right.
legislators. So it'd be.
Lenny and Jen.
Mira.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So June 3rd
Brad
and June
and
4th?
June 3rd and June 4th. I know one's a Monday, which is gonna be hard. And
It's the first Monday, it's not a problem with us, and June 4th is the Triton prom.
yes, I know. They're not ideal dates. It's what he had open, and she said he literally has nothing for the next
Yeah.
week and a half, which was the other
But
option.
the
was
3rd
to
is
try
the
and
first
hold it.
Monday, I know we don't meet the first
We
Monday,
meet.
so.
Yeah.
You do?
You guys meet every Monday, right?
No.
She said.
We're on we're on a summer schedule.
Which is, what is it?
We start on June 3rd, we're meeting every other week.
You normally meet every Monday? God bless you.
Oh, we do.
Are you serious?
I'm sensing some jealousy.
I'm with them, God bless them.
Oh. Holy smoke. Okay.
You want to meet more often?
Hell no. Wow.
Freeman does.
I may go over there in my
Go with
office.
you.
That's the one that she wasn't sure he was gonna have free. He has apparently a few things penciled in. She felt like if she talked to him, he would be willing to move them off if that was the date that we could make work.
Ralph
But-
would have to be
Just
here.
let us know.
But she didn't confirm back. So what I said was, I would come here tonight, get feedback on those two dates, on which one was better and where we'd like to meet and a time. It would have to be an evening. And then when she called me back, if the 4th is the date that we want to go for and it's available, great. If the 3rd is the one that's the only thing that's available and at least some people can make it, then that would be the direction that we'd have to go in. But she was really hopeful that both of them would be okay.
Where do we want to meet?
It can be at Triton, it can be in one of the towns, I mean, it doesn't. Senator-wise, I'm gonna guess they're gonna say Triton is the best,
I
but
would say that, yeah.
Senator Zogby always wants to be in Salisbury, but I think, given that it's part of the district, she can probably make her way to the high school.
As long as Bruce can be there, it's good.
Yes. Yeah. So, preference for the
4th?
4th,
4th.
and go with the 3rd if we have to. Yes.
Works for me.
Yeah, because they don't want to say no.
I know, exactly. And aiming for an evening, do we wanna say 7 or, I don't know if we can make it out here at 6:30, she said he's in Boston both days, so
7's better.
you'd have to.
Yeah, later is easier.
7 o'clock.
So 7 o'clock, tell them 6:30.
The kids on the left, that's a good idea.
Like 6 o'clock, I think.
Promenade's at 5:30.
5:30, so it'll be out of there by 7.
Okay. Alright, so, when I talk to his scheduler, which should be tomorrow, I will make that request and let you all know. Okay, that's, I think, everything on the agenda, unless anybody else has anything they wanna.
Bunny Collin, Rowley. I thought I'd seen the agreement that the this committee would actually agree on a town representative for the teacher union negotiations?
That doesn't happen until the fall.
Well,
Oh, is it in the agreement? It's law.
It's not in the agreement.
It's not in the agreement, it's in law. It's a legal requirement, but that won't happen again until the fall,
Before the next,
before the
So we
teacher
would-
contract, right?
we
It
would
runs
do
for
that
3
at-
years.
At the September 3rd of the meeting?
Yeah.
That would be on the agenda for September 3rd.
thank you.
And the way the law works is it's not a vote of the selectmen. It's a vote of whoever, we post that on the agenda here, whoever shows up has a vote in that, as far as selectmen. So, it's kind of a weird.
So any selectman who shows up gets a vote.
Yes.
So be
This
there
is-
or be square.
This is like especially a scheduled meeting, it's not, Raleigh doesn't do that. When in the past we've had, it's basically been, like this, and someone says no, and then you all vote on it. And the other the other way, so.
The problem is, if you're like the voters.
No. You guys do not.